We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 51b. The Gemara here is continuing the Mishnah in Bab Metzia. So it says, let's say a person found a shtar chov. So yesh ban achrayis nechasim. So if this shtar chov, if it has written in there, there's a lien on the property. So lo yachzir. So in that situation, he should not return the shtar chov to the lender. Why? Shebezdin nifroin mehen. Because even if the borrower were to admit that he has not yet paid, and the borrower says the document should go to the lender, but that the fact of the matter is that if there's a lien written into the shtar, you would collect not only from the borrower, you would collect from those who purchased, from the lekuchos of the borrower, and it could be there's a conspiracy over here, where really the borrower and the lender are conspiring to try to collect from the lekuchos. So therefore, if achrayus is written into the shtar, it's going to be a problem to return it. However, the Mishnah continues, Ein bo an achrayus nechasim. Let's say you have no achrayus written into the shtar, so then already yachzir, then he is allowed to return it. She'ein bezin nifroin mehen, because in such a situation, there's no collecting from property that was sold to the lekuchos, and so therefore there's no issue if the borrower admits that it should go to the lender. It's not an issue. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. You see already here in Rabbi Meir that if there's no achrayus nechasim written into the shtar, we don't assume that you can collect from achrayus. We say no, it's not written in, so you don't collect. And again, in our Mishnah by the Ketubot, it said even when it's not written in, you do collect. The Chachamim say, they argue with Rabbi Meir, and they say echad zeh v'echad zeh. In both situations, whether there's achrayus nechasim written into the shtar, whether it's not written into the shtar, lo yachzir, you cannot return it. Shebezdin nifroin mehen, because in both situations, according to the Chachamim, Bezdin does collect. In other words, we just assume that the scribe, the sofer, left out the achrayus nechasim. So it seems again that the end of our Mishnah goes like the Chachamim, which we're assuming is Rabbi Yehuda. And so the Gemara says, Reisha Rabbi Meir, the Sefer Rabbi Yehuda, are you going to say that the Reisha of our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir and the Sefer is Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara says, V'chitema. Now if you're going to suggest, Kula Rabbi Meir, maybe you'll suggest that our entire Mishnah really is Rabbi Meir. V'shani, Leila Rabbi Meir ben Ksuba l'shtari. Maybe Rabbi Meir makes a distinction between a Ksuba and other shtaros. Maybe when it comes to other shtaros. So by other shtaros we say that if the achrayus nechasim is not written in, then there's no lien. You don't collect from that property that was sold. But maybe by a Ksuba, Rabbi Meir would say, no, even if it's not written in, there's still going to be achrayus. But the Gemara says, Umi shani le. But does Rabbi Meir really make such a distinction? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa. Brisa says as follows: Chamisha govin min ha-mechurarin. There are 5 situations where you collect only from the free property, meaning to say you're not going to collect from the chasim mishubadim. You're not going to collect from property that has a lien on it. Ve'elu hein, and here are the 5 situations where that happens. Peiros or shvach peiros. Let's say you have the produce or the produce that has gained in value. V'hamekabel oliver. Let's say somebody accepts upon himself lozun es ben ishto. He says he's going to support the son of his wife, ubas ishto, or the daughter of his wife. The get chov she'ein bo achrayus, or let's say you have a shtar, a document that's collecting a debt, but achrayus is not written in it. Uchsubas isha she'ein bo achrayus, and the same is true by a ksuba. That also, if the achrayus is not written in it, so you don't collect from the chasim mishubadim. And so the Gemara says, Man shamat le'da'amar achrayus lav to soferu. Who is the author of this brisa that says that we do not assume that leaving out the achrayus is a scribal error and you're not allowed to collect from that property, from the nechasim mishubadim? Rabbi Meir. It would be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir should be the author of this brisa. Vikatani, and what does it say in this brisa? Ksubas isha. It doesn't only say by other shtaros. It says ksubas isha as well. So it's clear that Rabbi Meir does not make a distinction between other shtaros and ksubas isha. And so the Gemara answers, Ibo Yisayim, if you want, I could say Rabbi Meir. You could say our Mishnah is all Rabbi Meir. Ibo Yisayim Rabbi Yehuda, there's another way you could also say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara explains, Ibo Yisayim Rabbi Yehuda, if you want, I could say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, because Hasam Kasvalei Hiskabalti, when Rabbi Yehuda said that you're able to write into the shtar to have a ksuba that's less than the 200 or the 100, that's because she wrote into it, I've already received 100, I've already received 50, so therefore you don't have to pay the full amount. But over here in our Mishnah, lo kasvale hiskabalti. She didn't write hiskabalti, and so therefore it is impossible to give less than 200 or 100. And Iba say Rabbi Meir, if you want, I could say our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And what does it mean? My chayiv. What does it mean in the Mishnah when it says chayiv? Again, in the situation of the property that you're paying from, tekatani mina mechurarin. When it says the word chayiv in the Mishnah, it doesn't mean from the chasim mishubadim. It only really means from the free property, which again, that's Rabbi Meir shita. Rabbi Meir shita is that in general, if the achrayus nechasim is not written in the ksuba, you cannot collect from the nechasim mishubadim. And Rashi over here explains peiros u'shvach peiros. So again, it said in the brisa there are 5 cases where you don't collect from nechasim mishubadim. The first 2 was the produce and the gain in value from the produce. So Rashi explains what that means. Kedetanan Mesechet Gittin. This is as we learned in the mission of Mesechet Gittin. Ein motzian lachilas peros l'shvach karkos minachasim mishubadim and they tikkun olam. It's because of tikkun olam that they said you can't collect from nechasim mishubadim in these two cases. Now it's explained in Bab Metzia what this means. Lachilas peros v'l'shvach karkos. What does it mean? Achilas peros and shvach karkos. Ketzad. What's the case? Let's say a person stole a field from his friend, and he sells it to somebody else, and then that field is improved. Now it's being taken away from the purchaser because it really needs to go back to the original owner. And now it's going back to the original purchaser, to the original owner with all of this improvement. The shevach, the peiros, it's all going back. The nigzel is taking it away. So now the person who purchased it wants to get his money back. Now when he's going back to the person who sold it to him, and there was a lien on that property, it was sold by achrayas. So in that situation, when he's collecting the principal, he's even allowed to take from the property where there's a lien on the property of the seller. Let's say the seller sold his property to somebody else, so he can take that property. However, when it comes to all the improvements he made, that he can only collect from the free property of the person who sold it to him. He can't collect from the liened property. That's because of tikkun olam. Because that's not a set amount. Nobody knows how much shvach it can go up. It's infinite potentially. So there, the purchaser already, the people who purchase stuff, they're not going to know how much they have to be careful, and therefore you shouldn't collect from them in terms of the improvement. It also said in the Brais of Amakabal of Lozan Ben Ishto Bas Ishto, also over there, let's say a person accepted upon himself to support the son of his wife or the daughter of his wife, so they're also Afuin Govim and Mishubadim. He shouldn't collect from the Chasim Mishubadim for that purpose. Lefisha Ein Ksuvin Ve'in Ksuvim. Again, it's not a set amount, it's not something that's written out, and so therefore that kind of support that needs to go to Ben Ishto or Bas Ishto, it only comes from the Chasim B'nei Chorin. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Lo Kasav Lo V'chulu. Let's say he doesn't write into the Ksuba that let's say she's taken captive, he's going to redeem her, still he has an obligation to redeem her. And the Gemara says, Amar Avua de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, said, Eishes Yisrael shenen. So let's say you have a situation of the wife of a Yisrael, and she is raped. Asura lebala, she's prohibited to her husband, even though it was a rape, she is still prohibited according to the father of Shmuel. Chashinan shemet chilasa ba'onas v'sofa baratzim, because we're afraid maybe at the beginning it was a rape, but maybe at the end already when she was in the middle of the act, it became something that was done willingly, and therefore it would be a problem of adultery, and she should be prohibited to her husband. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rav li'avua de Shmuel. Rav asked the father of Shmuel the following question from the text of the Ksuba itself. It says in the Ksuba, Im tishtaboy efrakinach vosvinach lilintu. It says, if you're captured, I will redeem you, and then you're going to be my wife. And so therefore, in that situation, she was raped, and apparently she's permitted. So why is that the case? Shouldn't we say that it should be a problem, that we're afraid maybe it's tchilosa ba'onas v'sofa baratzim? And so the Gemara says, Ishtik, the Gemara says to that, the father of Shmuel was quiet. And the Gemara continues, Kari Rav aleh de avua de Shmuel. So Rav said about the father of Shmuel, the following pasuk applies to him. Sarim matzur b'milim v'chaf yasimu l'piyam, that he was like a person who was a prince who held back his words, meaning to say there was a response to this question, but he held back and he didn't give the response. And the Gemara says, Ma'yis leila meimar. So what should he have said? What was the response to this question from the Ksuba? And the Gemara answers, B'shvuya hekilu. He could have simply answered that when it comes to a woman who's held captive, there we're more lenient. It's not the same as a situation of rape. Maybe by a situation of rape we would be strict. She cannot go back to her husband because maybe it was sofa baratzan, but by someone who's held captive we'd be more lenient. And the Gemara continues, V'la'avua de Shmuel. But according to the father of Shmuel, Ones de Shari Rachmana, the Torah itself says that in the case of rape, she's permitted to her husband. So hechi mashkachasla. So what's the case? We should always say she's not permitted because you have a concern that maybe she did it willingly at the end. And the Gemara answers, Kagon de Ka'amri Eidim. No, it could be the following case. Let's say the Eidim say, Shetzavcha mitchila v'ad sof. They testify that she was screaming, she was protesting from the beginning to the end. In that situation, you know for sure that the end of the act was not done willingly, and in that situation, she would be permitted to her husband. But the Gemara continues, Upliga de Rava. But this opinion of the father of Shmuel argues on Rava. The Yamar Rava, because Rava says, Kol shetchilasa ba'ones v'sof baratzon, any situation where in the beginning it was forced, but at the end it was baratzon, it was done willingly. Afilu hi omeres, even if she says, Hanichu lo, let him continue, Shil moli nizkak lo hisochartu, if not for this, I would have already hired him to do this. In other words, she says, she admits this was done totally willingly at the end, but Rava says, despite what she says, mutaris, she is still mutaris to her husband. My time, and what's the reason? Yetzer albisha, because once the act was started ba'ones, now the Yetzer hara took over, that's still considered to be coercion, and therefore it's still considered to be onus the whole time, even if she says she did it willingly at the end, and she's permitted to her husband. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavase de Rava, we have a brisa that supports what Rava says, V'hi nisbasa asura, this is the brisa darshaning the pasuk says, in a case of lo nisbasa, where she's not raped, she's prohibited to her husband, ha nisbasa mutaris, if she is raped, so then already she's going to be mutaris to her husband, v'yesh lach acheres, and the brisa says, but there is an example, there is a case, she'afa pisha lo nisbasa, even in a situation where she was not raped, still she is mutaris. What is the case where she's mutaris even in that case? Ve'ezuzu, what's the example of a case where it's done willingly, but she's permitted to her husband? Kol shetchilasa ba'ones v'sofa baratzon. If you have a case where at the beginning it was ba'ones, but at the end it was willingly, that's considered ba'ones, and she's still mutaris. That's exactly what Rava said. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa that says as follows, V'hilo nisbasa asura, again it's prohibited if she was not raped, she's prohibited to her husband. Ha nisbasa muteris, if she was raped, so then she's permitted to her husband. V'yesh lach acheres, and there's another case, Sha'afa pisha nisbasa asura, where she's prohibited even though she was taken forcefully. Ve'ezu zu eshes kohen, and what's the example of that case? That would be the wife of a kohen. By a kohen we are stricter. By the wife of a kohen we say even if it was an ones, even in that situation, she is then prohibited to her husband. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Mishum Rav Yishmael, and the name of Rav Yishmael as follows, V'hilo nisbasa asura, again she's prohibited if it's a situation where she was not raped. Ha nisbasa muteris, but if she was raped then she's muteris. V'yesh lo acheres, and there's another example, she'afal pisha lo nisbasa, even though though you have a situation where it was done willingly, muteris, she is still permitted to her husband. Ve'ezu zu shekidusha kidushay tos. That would be a case, what would be the example? Let's say that original kiddushin she had with her husband, it was all done by mistake, it was a kidushay tos, it wasn't a real kiddushin, so in that situation it's not considered adultery, and she is still permitted. In that case, Shafilu Banam Murkav al Kseifa, even if her son is riding on her shoulder, Mima Enes V'holeches Lo, still she's allowed to refuse, and she is allowed to continue. And that refers to the fact that she is not considered married to this individual, to this husband, because it is a Kiddushay Tos, and that's why Holeches Lo, if she wants to leave that marriage, she can leave that marriage, she does not need a get, and again, if she would be with another man, it would not be considered adultery. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Hani noshi de gonvu ganve, let's say you have a case of a situation of women that were kidnapped, Sharyun leguvrayu, they are going to be permitted to their husbands. And the Gemara says, Amri le Rabbanan Rav Yehuda, but the Rabbanan said to Rav Yehuda, you're saying they're permitted to their husbands because they were raped, it's considered forced. But don't they bring them bread? Doesn't that show that what they are doing, they're doing willingly? And the Gemara says that proves nothing, machmas yira. They're only doing that out of fear of those who kidnap them. It's not proving that they're with them willingly. And the Gemara asks a similar question, aren't they sending them arrows? Isn't that also proof that they're there willingly? And the Gemara says again the same thing, machmas yira. Again, they're only doing that out of fear. It's still considered that they're being coerced. And the Gemara continues, Vaday shavkinu v'yazlam minafshayu asira. Now, for sure, if those who kidnap them let them go and then they come back, they return of their own accord, then it's considered to be willing, and then they actually would be prohibited to their husbands. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Shavuye Malchus, let's say they're captured by the monarchy, by the king, Harehem Keshuvuye, and they're treated just like regular captives. Genuve Listus, let's say they're taken by plunderers, by robbers, by bandits, Einon Keshuvuye, and then they're not treated like regular Shvuyin. In that situation, it's already going to be considered like it was done willingly, because maybe they're hoping that they will be able to marry these, maybe they're hoping they'll be able to marry these individuals. But the Gemara continues, Vatanya Ipcha, but didn't we have a brisa that says the exact opposite? On the contrary, it says by Shavuye Malchus, you have to be concerned that they're doing it willingly, that they might think they're going to get married, and by the Listus, it's the opposite also, that they're considered like Shvuyin, and they are being coerced. And the Gemara answers, Malchus ha-Malchus lo kash. It's not difficult, the question of a king against a king. It depends what kind of king. Habe Malchus Achashverosh. In one case, we're talking about the king like a king Achashverosh. There's no chance that they're going to marry him, and therefore that's considered coercion. But Habe Malchus ben Netzer. But the other case, we're talking like a kingdom of ben Netzer. That was just an individual who held a small amount of territory. There, really, it might be considered to be done willingly, because they're thinking they'll marry this individual. And similarly, you can answer the other question, listus alistus lokash. It's not a question when you're talking about bandits. Habe ben Netzer, habe listim dialma. In one case, we're talking about ben Netzer. Again, that's somebody they would want to marry, and they're thinking that they're doing it willingly. But by listim dialma, they have no interest in marrying the listim dialma, and therefore, again, there is no concern. It's considered to be coercion. But the Gemara asks, ben Netzer, but this individual ben Netzer, hasam karile melech, v'achi karile listim. In one case, you're referring to him as a king, and you're comparing him to Achashverosh. In the other case, you're referring to him as a bandit. And the Gemara says, in yes, gabe Achashverosh, listim hu, when it comes relative to Achashverosh, he's considered like a bandit. Gabe listim dialma melechu, but if you're comparing him to listim dialma, to just regular bandits, compared to them, he's already considered to be a king. And the Gemara continues with a kohenes adrinach lemedintach v'chulu. It's said in the Mishnah by a kohenes. So the idea is you redeem her, but then you have to return her to her province because she's not allowed to marry a kohen. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, Almana l'kohen gadol. When it comes to a widow who's married to a kohen gadol, that's actually a relationship that is prohibited. But there is a ksuba in that situation. So chayiv liftosa, let's say they do marry one another, he is obligated to redeem her. Shani korei ba, because we can call about her as well. The same idea of a kohenes adrinach lemedintach. When it comes to a kohenes, I'm going to return you to your province. And Rashi over here explains, Almana l'kohen gadol, kaimalon l'kaman. We established later on, Beperak Almana nizonis, yesh lo ksuba. There is a ksuba in that case. With Tanai ksuba, ahu de l'mishka l'meipa koi, avol Tanai ksuba de l'meikem kamei kegon mizonos or refuah. But not all aspects of the ksuba apply to her. For example, mizonos, and to heal her. For when it comes to those, Amrin and biyavamas to lesla, those she's not entitled to. So certain parts of the ksuba she is entitled to by Almana l'kohen gadol, and certain parts not. Beperak yesh mutaros, v'achash minan Abai, here Abai is teaching us the Tanai Ksuba de Perkona Isla, that when it comes to the Tanai Ksuba in terms of redeeming her, that she does have. That is what Abai is teaching us over here. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph.